Catherine II, better known as Catherine the Great, was born Princess Sophie of Anhalt-Zerbst on the 2nd of May, 1729. She ruled as Empress of Russia from 1762 until 1769, her death in 1796. She came to power after leading a coup against her husband, Emperor Peter III. Her long reign marked a golden age for Russia, deeply influenced by the ideas of the Enlightenment. During her rule, Russia experienced major cultural and political growth with the founding of new cities, universities, and theaters. She encouraged immigration from across Europe and secured Russia's place among the great powers of the continent. After seizing power, Catherine often relied on her noble favorites and advisors, including Count Grigory Orlov and Prince Grigory Potemkin. With the support of brilliant generals like Alexander Suvorov and Pyotr Rumyantsev, and skilled admirals such as Samuel Greig and Fyodor Ushakov, she expanded Russia's territory through war and diplomacy. In the West, she placed her former lover on the throne of Poland and later took part in the partitions that divided the country. In the South, she annexed the Crimean Khanate after defeating the Ottoman Empire in the Russo-Turkish War. With Britain's help, Russia also colonized the region known as New Russia along the Black and Azov Seas. In the east, Russian explorers reached Alaska and began the colonization of what became known as Russian America. Catherine founded many new cities in the newly conquered territories, including Yekaterinoslav, Kherson, Nikolaev, and Sevastopol. Like Peter the Great, whom she admired deeply, she worked to modernize Russian society along Western European lines. However, much of Russia's economy still depended on serfdom, and both the state and private landowners continued to exploit peasant labor. This oppression led to several uprisings, the largest being Pugachev's rebellion, which involved peasants, Cossacks, and people of the Volga region. Catherine's government crushed the revolt, but made few real changes to improve the lives of the serfs. During her reign, Catherine confirmed the manifesto on the freedom of the nobility, first issued by Peter III. This decree freed nobles from compulsory service in the army or government. As a result, the Russian aristocracy grew more independent and wealthy, building grand mansions in the classical style she favored. Catherine is often regarded as one of Europe's enlightened monarchs because she supported education, science, and the arts. She presided over what became known as the Russian Enlightenment and established the Smolny Institute of Noble Maidens in St. Petersburg, the first state-funded higher education institution for women in Europe. Catherine was born in Stettin, in the Kingdom of Prussia, now known as Szczecin in Poland. Her father, Christian August, Prince of Anhalt-Zerbst, served as a Prussian general and governor of Stettin. Her mother, Joanna Elizabeth of Holstein-Gottorp, came from a well-connected noble family. Although Sophie, as she was then called, was born a princess, her family had little wealth. Her mother was ambitious and used her noble connections to secure her daughter a better future through marriage. At the time, Germany was divided into hundreds of small states, and political marriages were a key tool for families seeking power or influence. Sophie received a traditional education for a German princess. She learned French, the language of Europe's upper class, and studied religion, manners, and the arts. She was described as bright, curious, and determined. Despite her noble birth, her upbringing was modest, and she later described her childhood as uneventful. She once wrote to her friend Baron Grimm that she found nothing particularly interesting in her early life. When she was 10 years old, Sophie met her distant cousin Peter, who would later become Emperor Peter III of Russia. She did not like him from the start, describing him as pale, childish, and fond of alcohol. Despite her feelings, her family saw Peter as an opportunity to improve their position. Her mother began preparing her for the possibility of marrying into the Russian royal family, which would eventually change Sophie's life forever. Sophie's marriage to the future Russian Tsar came about through a complex web of political intrigue known as the Lopukhin affair. European powers like Prussia and key figures such as Count Jean-Armand de Lestock saw her marriage as a way to strengthen ties between Russia and Prussia, weaken Austria's influence, and remove the Austrian-leaning Russian Chancellor Alexei Bestuchev-Ryumin. However, the plan failed, largely because of the interference of Sophie's ambitious mother, Joanna Elizabeth of Holstein-Gottorp. Joanna was known for her cold and manipulative nature. She was obsessed with gaining fame through her daughter's marriage and future as Empress of Russia. Her behavior and suspected spying for the Prussian king angered Empress Elizabeth, who eventually expelled her from Russia. Despite Joanna's poor reputation, Elizabeth took a liking to Sophie and arranged her marriage to the future Peter III. Sophie arrived in Russia in 1744 when she was 15. Determined to win favor, she worked tirelessly to learn Russian and to please the Empress, her lover Alexei Razumovsky, and the Russian people. She studied late into the night, and even when she fell ill with pneumonia, she refused to give up. In her memoirs, Catherine later wrote that this was the moment she resolved to do whatever was necessary to reach the throne. During one severe illness, Sophie's devotion to the Orthodox faith helped her earn Elizabeth's trust. When her mother wanted a Lutheran pastor to visit her, Sophie insisted on seeing an Orthodox priest instead. This choice endeared her to the Empress and marked a turning point in her relationship with the Russian court. Though her father opposed her conversion, Sophie officially joined the Russian Orthodox Church in June 1744, taking the name Catherine Alexeyevna to honor Catherine Unverfurser. A year later, in August 1745, she married Peter, who was then 16. Her father did not attend the wedding. After the marriage, Catherine and Peter lived in the Oranienbaum Palace, where they were expected to gain experience in governance by managing the small duchy of Holstein-Gottorp. However, their relationship was unhappy. Peter was immature and showed little interest in his wife, and the marriage went unconsummated for several years. Peter took a mistress, and Catherine began forming friendships and alliances with powerful figures at court. She also turned to reading, developing a passion for literature, philosophy, and politics. While Peter read religious and trivial texts, Catherine immersed herself in works by Voltaire and other Enlightenment writers. Reading the Roman historian Tacitus deeply influenced her thinking, teaching her to view politics as a struggle for power driven by self-interest rather than ideals. Catherine's marriage grew colder, and her personal life became the subject of rumors. She formed several relationships, including one with Sergei Saltykov, a courtier who may have been her first lover. Some historians believe their affair was encouraged by Empress Elizabeth, who wanted an heir to the throne. In 1754, Catherine gave birth to a son, Paul. Although she insisted Peter was the father, gossip suggested otherwise. Despite this, Paul was accepted as the legitimate heir. Catherine later had other lovers, including the future king of Poland, Stanislaus Poniatowski, and powerful Russian nobles such as Grigory Orlov and Grigory Potemkin. As Peter's behavior became increasingly erratic and childish, he alienated many at court. He held military drills in the morning and spent his nights drinking and playing with servants, behavior that deeply embarrassed his wife. Catherine withdrew from him and spent more time alone, focusing on her studies and political networking. When Peter became emperor in January 1762, after the death of Empress Elizabeth, his actions quickly made him unpopular. His admiration for the Prussian king Frederick II and his decision to end Russia's war against Prussia angered the army and nobility. He also planned a war with Denmark, one of Russia's allies, over his native Holstein. In July 1762, after only 6 months on the throne, Peter faced a conspiracy led by his wife. When Catherine learned that one of her co-conspirators had been arrested, she acted quickly. On the 9th of July, she left her palace and went to the Izmailovsky regiment, where she addressed the soldiers, asking for their protection. The troops supported her, and she moved to another regiment, where she was declared Empress of Russia. Peter was arrested and forced to sign an abdication document. Just 8 days later, on July 17, 1762, Peter died under mysterious circumstances at Ropsha. Officially, his death was said to be from natural causes, but it was widely believed that he was murdered, possibly on the orders of Catherine's ally, Alexei Orlov. With Peter gone, Catherine became the sole ruler of Russia. Like Catherine I before her, she claimed the throne in her own right, not merely as a regent for her son. Her bold rise to power shocked Europe and marked the beginning of one of the most remarkable reigns in Russian history. Catherine was crowned in Moscow's Assumption Cathedral on the 22nd of September, 1762. For the ceremony, the court jeweler Jérémy Pozier created the great imperial crown of Russia in just 2 months. Inspired by Byzantine styles, it had 2 domed halves, one gold and one silver, joined by a garland and a low hoop to symbolize the Eastern and Western Roman empires. Set with 75 pearls and 4,936 Indian diamonds shaped into laurel and oak leaves, topped by a large ruby spinel of nearly 399 carats and a diamond cross, the crown weighed about 2.3 kilograms. From 1762 until the monarchy ended in 1917, it served as the Romanovs' coronation crown and today is displayed in the Kremlin Armory. Under Catherine, Russia expanded by roughly 520,000 square kilometers, absorbing lands such as New Russia, Crimea, the North Caucasus, Right Bank Ukraine, Belarus, Lithuania, and Courland, mostly at the expense of the Ottoman Empire and the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. After her early reliance on the foreign minister Nikita Panin, who tried to build a northern accord with Prussia, Poland, and Sweden, Catherine replaced him with Ivan Osterman when that plan stalled. She signed a commercial treaty with Britain in 1766, but avoided a full military alliance, wary of British power after the 7 Years' War. Catherine finished Peter the Great's push to the Black Sea. In the Russo-Turkish War of 1768 to 1774, Russia crushed the Ottomans at battles like Chesma and Kagul. By the Treaty of Küçük-Kaynarca in 1774, Russia gained Azov, Kerch, Yenikale, Kinburn, and a strip of Black Sea coast between the Dnieper and Bug, won the right to navigate and trade more freely, claimed protection over Orthodox Christians under Ottoman rule, and turned Crimea into a Russian protectorate. After propping up a Crimean ruler without success, Catherine annexed Crimea in 1783 and toured the region in 1787, an event that helped trigger another war with the Ottomans. In the 1787 to 1792 conflict, Russia secured further gains, including Ochakov and the lands between the southern Bug and the Dniester, confirmed by the Treaty of Jassy in 1792. In the newly acquired south, Russians founded cities such as Odessa, Kherson, Nikolaev, and Yekaterinoslav. To the southeast, Catherine moved to dominate the Caucasus. In 1783, she made Georgia a Russian protectorate through the Treaty of Georgievsk, promising defense against Persia. When Aga Muhammad Khan of Persia reasserted control and overran Georgia in 1795, Catherine launched a campaign in 1796 under Count Valerian Zubov that swept through much of modern Azerbaijan and reached the Aras-Kura rivers. Her death that November led her son Paul to recall the army, souring many officers who later turned against him. Catherine sought the image of an enlightened mediator in European affairs. She helped defuse the War of the Bavarian Succession, and in 1780 formed the League of Armed Neutrality to protect neutral shipping during the American Revolutionary War. Sweden tested Russia during 1788 to 1790, but despite Swedish hopes to strike near St. Petersburg while Russia fought the Ottomans, battles at sea like Högland and then Svensk Sund ended with the Treaty of Varela, restoring the status quo and keeping peace in the north for 2 decades. In Poland, Catherine placed her former lover, Stanisław August Poniatowski, on the throne in 1764 and gradually made the Commonwealth a Russian dependency. After an anti-Russian uprising known as the Confederation of Bar was crushed, she installed a permanent council to control the state through her envoys. Alarmed by Poland's 1791 constitution and wider democratic currents, she backed conservative magnates in the Targowica Confederation, defeated pro-constitution forces after Prussia failed to help them, and accepted huge territorial slices in the Second Partition of 1793. Following the Kosciuszko Uprising in 1794, Russia, Prussia, and Austria erased Poland from the map in the Third Partition of 1795. Catherine's advisor, Alexander Bezborodko, helped shape the final partitions, which gave Russia vast lands and millions of new subjects, including Vilnius and much of Belarus and Lithuania. The Qianlong Emperor of China followed an expansionist policy in Central Asia and viewed Russia as a rival, creating tense relations between Beijing and St. Petersburg. In 1762, he cancelled the Treaty of Kyakhta, which had regulated trade between the two empires. Tensions also increased because many Dzungar Mongols, fleeing from the genocide carried out by the Qing Empire, sought refuge in Russian lands. Catherine regarded the Qianlong Emperor as arrogant, and once declared that she would not die before defeating the Turks, humbling China, and opening trade with India. In a letter to Baron de Grimm, she even mockingly referred to him as "my Chinese neighbor with small eyes." Meanwhile, in the Far East, Russian explorers and traders expanded fur trapping in Kamchatka and the Kuril Islands, sparking interest in trading with Japan. In 1783, a Japanese captain named Daikokuya Kodayu was shipwrecked in the Aleutian Islands, which were then Russian territory. He was rescued and taken to meet Catherine at Tsarskoye Selo in 1791. The next year, Catherine sent Adam Laxman on a trade mission to Japan. Although Japan's shogunate received the delegation, negotiations ended without success. Later, her grandson Nicholas I would harshly judge her foreign policy, calling it dishonest and without clear direction. He believed she failed to achieve her original goals, and that her strategy caused the loss of territories in Poland and Lithuania to Prussia and Austria. Though Catherine made Russia a global power, she left it with a reputation for exploiting its own resources and people, leading to future instability and famine. Economically, Russia lagged far behind Western Europe. Historian François Crouzet described Catherine's Russia as lacking a free peasantry, a strong middle class, or legal support for private enterprise. Most industries, like textiles near Moscow and ironworks in the Urals, relied on forced serf labor. Catherine's strict regulations on merchants limited trade and discouraged innovation, though she did promote agricultural improvement. One of her few economic successes was encouraging German farmers to settle in the Volga region. These settlers modernized agriculture by introducing new farming techniques, milling systems, and livestock breeding. In 1768, Catherine established the Assignation Bank, which began issuing paper money the following year to ease the shortage of silver caused by war expenses. The new assignation rubles circulated alongside silver coins until 1849. She also pushed for financial reform under Prince A.I. Wyazemski, centralizing state revenues and creating Russia's first functional national budget in 1781. Catherine made public health a state concern. Influenced by European thinkers, she established hospitals, foundling homes, and medical statistics offices. In 1768, she had herself vaccinated against smallpox by an English doctor and later promoted the procedure across her empire, saving millions of lives. By 1800, around 2 million Russians had been inoculated, a remarkable achievement for her era. During her reign, serfdom was one of Russia's deepest social problems. By the early 1760s, Catherine personally owned about 500,000 serfs, while nearly 3 million more belonged to the state. Serfs were tied to the land and their lords, born into hereditary service. They owed their masters a share of crops and labor in return for protection, but they had almost no personal rights. Catherine introduced limited reforms. Serfs could file complaints against abusive nobles, though only through official bureaucratic channels and not directly to her. She also banned non-nobles from owning serfs and ended practices that forced free people back into serfdom. Still, landowners gained even more power under Catherine. They could punish serfs harshly, even sending them to Siberian labor camps. The only restriction was that they could not legally execute them. Catherine's refusal to free the serfs, combined with crop failures and harsh noble rule, fueled unrest. This led to the massive Pugachev Rebellion in 1774, when peasants, Cossacks, and others rose against her rule under a pretender claiming to be the true Tsar. Although the revolt was crushed, it terrified Catherine and ended any serious thought of reforming serfdom. Despite her admiration for Enlightenment ideas, Catherine's policies strengthened the nobility and deepened the divide between rich and poor. The peasants' loyalty to the Empress faded, replaced by anger and disillusionment. Her reign brought modernization and expansion to Russia, but for the millions of serfs who worked its land, life remained as harsh as ever. Catherine the Great was a strong supporter of art, literature, and education. The famous Hermitage Museum in St. Petersburg began as her private collection. She loved paintings, sculptures, and books so much that she built the Hermitage in 1770 to hold her growing treasures. By 1790, the museum contained tens of thousands of books, drawings, and precious stones. Catherine also introduced English-style gardens at her palaces, preferring natural curves, lakes, and soft landscapes over rigid designs. She admired the beauty of nature and expressed her love for it in her letters, calling her passion for gardening plantomania. Catherine also shared Europe's fascination with Chinese art and culture. She decorated her palaces with Chinese porcelain and built the Chinese Palace at Oranienbaum and the Chinese Village at Tsarskoye Selo, both in a style called chinoiserie. These buildings reflected her love for exotic design and her desire to blend Russian tradition with international trends. Beyond architecture, Catherine brought many great thinkers and scientists to Russia. She invited European intellectuals like Voltaire, Diderot, and D'Alembert to correspond with her and share their ideas about philosophy and government. She supported the Free Economic Society, which studied ways to modernize agriculture and industry. She also recruited talented scientists from across Europe, such as Leonhard Euler, Peter Simon Pallas, and Anders Johann Lexell, helping make St. Petersburg a center of learning. Her friendship with Voltaire lasted for 15 years, during which they exchanged many letters about politics, philosophy, and reform. Voltaire admired her deeply, calling her the Star of the North. After his death, she bought his library and preserved it in the National Library of Russia. Catherine was also an avid reader herself. She enjoyed novels and comedies for pleasure, studied books on history and economics for information, and turned to philosophy for guidance in ruling wisely. She admired the works of Montesquieu and Cesare Beccaria, whose ideas about justice and law inspired her own writings. Soon after becoming empress, Catherine invited Diderot to complete his encyclopédie in Russia, though he declined. Still, his influence, along with that of other Enlightenment writers, shaped her thinking. In 1766, she created the Grand Commission, a large council meant to discuss reforms for Russia's future. She wrote the Instructions for the Guidance of the Assembly, borrowing ideas from European philosophers about justice, equality, and government. Although many of these ideas were too liberal for her officials, the project showed her ambition to modernize Russia's laws. Catherine did succeed in reorganizing the empire's administration. She divided Russia into provinces and districts to make local government more efficient. She issued laws to support trade, education, and city organization, including the Charter to the Nobility and the Charter of the Towns in 1785. These reforms strengthened local authority and introduced new rules for trade and policing. Catherine's letters to Voltaire describe her reforms as slow but steady progress toward a more modern society. Her reign also became a cultural golden age. Russian writers like Gavrila Derzhavin and Denis Fonvizin flourished under her patronage. She supported the development of theater, opera, and ballet, founding institutions like the Bolshoi Ballet Academy in 1773. However, not all writers approved of her rule. When Alexander Radishchev published Journey from St. Petersburg to Moscow, criticizing serfdom and inequality, Catherine had the book burned and sent him into exile, fearing it might inspire revolution. Catherine's interest in education was deep and sincere. She believed that learning could change Russian society by shaping good citizens. To achieve this, she created schools and new educational systems inspired by Western Europe. She worked closely with her advisor Ivan Betskoy and foreign educators like Daniel Dumaresque and John Brown. In 1764, she founded the Smolny Institute for Noble Maidens, the first state-run higher education school for women in Europe. Girls there were taught languages, music, and manners, but lived under strict discipline. Later, Catherine expanded her education reforms to include a national school network. She divided schools into different levels and required subjects such as science, ethics, and law to be taught. The 1786 Statute of National Education established free public schools for non-serf children. By the end of her reign, hundreds of schools existed across Russia, though they reached only a small part of the population. In religion, Catherine showed little personal devotion, but much political strategy. She reduced the power of the Orthodox Church, taking over its lands and wealth to fund the state. She promoted tolerance when it suited her political goals, allowing Christians in the Ottoman Empire to practice freely and even offering protection to Jesuits expelled from Europe. Catherine's policy toward Islam was pragmatic. She at first restricted Muslims, encouraging conversion through rewards, but later chose tolerance. Her 1773 Edict of Religious Tolerance allowed Muslims to build mosques and practice their faith. She also created the Orenburg Muslim Spiritual Assembly to oversee religious affairs, giving the state control over Islamic leaders and education. Her treatment of Jews was more complex. After the partition of Poland, Russia gained a large Jewish population. Catherine restricted them to a special area known as the Pale of Settlement and required them to pay higher taxes than Orthodox Christians. While she allowed Jews to participate in trade and farming under certain conditions, she continued to treat them as foreigners with limited rights. By the end of her reign, Catherine had transformed Russia into a powerful empire that valued art, science, and education. Yet her reforms were uneven. She brought culture and progress to the elite, but the majority of her people, especially the serfs, remained oppressed. Even so, her influence on Russian politics, art, and thought continued long after her death, shaping the country's identity for generations to come. Catherine enjoyed many personal successes, but her life ended with two disappointments. In September 1796, her Swedish cousin, King Gustav IV Adolf, visited with the idea that her granddaughter Alexandra would marry him and become Queen of Sweden. A grand ball on the 11th of September was meant to announce the engagement. Gustav was told Alexandra would not convert to Lutheranism, and although he liked her very much, he refused to attend the ball and returned to Stockholm. The setback hurt Catherine's health. She recovered enough to start planning a ceremony to name her favorite grandson, Alexander, as heir in place of her difficult son, Paul. But she died before she could make this official, a little over 2 months after the failed engagement ball. On the 16th of November, 1796, Catherine woke early, had her usual coffee, and began working on state papers, telling her maid, Maria Perecusikina, that she had slept better than she had in a long time. Not long after 9 o'clock, she was found on the floor with a purplish face, a weak pulse, and shallow, labored breathing. The court doctor said she had suffered a stroke. Despite efforts to revive her, she fell into a coma, received the last rites, and died the next evening at about 9:45. An autopsy confirmed that a stroke caused her death. Rumors quickly spread about how she died. The most notorious claim said she died during an act of bestiality with a horse. Satirical British and French writings at the time helped spread this story. Earlier, in 1647, the German scholar Adam Olearius had written that Russians had a tendency toward bestiality with horses, a slur that anti-Russian writers repeated in the 17th and 18th centuries to paint Russia as barbaric and Asiatic. Catherine's undated will, found in early 1792 by her secretary Alexander Krapovitsky, gave clear instructions for her funeral. She asked to be laid out, dressed in white, with a golden crown on her head, with her Christian name inscribed on it. She ordered that mourning be limited to 6 months, and said shorter would be better. In the end, she was laid out with a gold crown and a silver brocade dress. On the 25th of November, her coffin, richly covered in gold fabric, was set on a raised platform in the Grand Gallery's mourning chamber, designed and decorated by Antonio Rinaldi. The painter Elisabeth Vigée-Lebrun described the scene. The Empress's body lay in state for 6 weeks, in a large, magnificently decorated room, lit day and night. Catherine rested on a ceremonial bed surrounded by the coats of arms of Russia's towns. Her face was uncovered, and her fair hand lay on the bed. Ladies of the court kept vigil by turns and would go to kiss her hand, or at least appear to do so. Vigée Lebrun also left a full account of the funeral in her memoirs.